grace so relentless. I am won by perfect love, wrapped within the arms of heaven, in a peace that lasts forever, sinking deep in mercy. See, and I'm wide awake, drawing close, stirred by grace, and oh, my heart is yours, and all fear removed. I breathe you in and lean into your love. Oh, your love. And when I'm lost, you pursue me. Lift my head to see your glory, Lord of all. So beautiful. Here in you I find shelter, captivated by the splendor of your face. My secret place, and now wide awake, drawing close, stirred by grace, and oh, my heart is yours, and all fear removed. I breathe you in and lean into your love. Oh, your love. And your love so deep is washing over me. Your face is all I see. You are my everything. Jesus Christ, you are my one desire. Lord, hear my only cry, to know you all my life. And I'm wide awake, drawing close, stirred by know you all my life. God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of life. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. Don't speak in vain, your syllable empty your void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature, so will I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky, you canvas up your grace. If creation still obeys you, so will I. And so will I. And so will I. Stars were made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. If the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. So will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls short, then we'll sing again 100 billion times. salvation. You chased down my heart through all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designing a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I. I can see your heart a billion different ways. Every precious one, a child you gave to save. You gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
Thanks for watching today. It's Easter weekend, and in the traditional greeting on Easter, you may not be here, but you can still respond. Some of you say, well, I don't want to feel awkward talking to the computer. That's okay. You can whisper it, you can say it in your head, it's okay. But the traditional greeting was, He is risen. And the response was, He is risen indeed. And thank you for the huge crowd that's here watching this. But thanks for tuning in. On John chapter 20, it sets the stage for us. And let me read this for you. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, they've taken the Lord out of the tomb and we don't know where they put him. So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, and the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, went also inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, woman, why are you crying? They've taken my Lord away, she said, and I don't know where they put him. At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not recognize or realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for? Thinking that he was the gardener, she said, sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said, do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, I have seen the Lord. And she told them that he had said these things to her. In this story, Jesus was more than a rabbi to his disciples and his followers. He was their hope. He was the one to take over and get rid of the Roman domination. He was their spiritual Messiah and their potential political leader. But he was one who would not only restore Israel to what it knew, but he would be their God-given leader and correct the Roman problems and even the Jewish problems. In the last few days, though, their hope, Jesus, had been arrested, beaten, crucified. He was dead. And John wants us to know it was dark. As I read through this passage many times, let me tell you the phrases that keep jumping out to me. Early in the morning. That means before the day began. The first priority for Mary was to get to the tomb. Early in the morning, on the first day of the week, the Sabbath was over. It was the start of a new week. Later, Christians turned this into Sunday. It was the new Sabbath. But on the first day of the week, she went to the tomb. Early in the morning, on the first day, while it was dark, she went to the tomb. I want to share with you 3 observations this Easter weekend. Here's the first one. I want my heart to be open so that I discover Jesus in the dark times of life. Now, pay attention to this. It was not just dark physically. It was dark emotionally, spiritually. Darkness was everywhere. And here's one of the things I've discovered, that within the darkness, though, the deeper lessons of life are often learned. April 12th is the date of Easter this year. The last time the Easter was on April 12th was 22 years ago. 22 years ago on April 12th, I was in Tallahassee, outside of ministry, contemplating what I was going to do. I'd gone to church that morning, to a community church, and worshiped with them in their songs, and later I went to a Presbyterian church because I liked the way they got talk there. So I went to 2 services that day, came back to my home, and I was broken, wounded. I was in darkness, despair. That afternoon, in my weeping and coming out of that, all of a sudden, out of that darkness, someone turned on the light. And I began to realize, in connection with God, that Suncoast began that day. 22 years ago on April 12th, it all started for me. And it was out of my darkness that the light came on. 2 weeks ago, we looked at Exodus chapter 20. We discovered the people in the Old Testament, they were afraid of God, who was in this cloud covering the mountain. And it says that Moses went into the darkness where God was. In this story, this resurrection story in John, we see these continual themes of light and darkness. John wants us to feel the darkness. John wants us to sense his emotions of sadness, bleakness, discouragement, death, grief, hopelessness, all darkness. It was still dark. Things had not changed as he begins the story. Hope was gone. And I think the worst kind of darkness is when hope is gone. Life was not the way it was supposed to be. Have you ever been in a place where it seemed like life was not the way it should be? Today we're living in a pandemic. The coronavirus has devastated thousands. We're discovering that in these days, though, maybe the death toll won't be as high as what was predicted, and we're grateful for that. But for some, it doesn't matter. You've been devastated anyway. A couple of weeks ago, my nearly 94-year-old mother, who lives in St. Petersburg, had fever and congestion. Her doctor ordered for my mom to take the coronavirus test. Before she could get in to take the test, though, her husband took her to the emergency room because she had fever and chills and congestion. She is suspect for pneumonia. We were very concerned. The next morning, my mother checked herself out of the hospital and went home. My sister was telling me these details, and she was furious. She lives in St. Petersburg, near my mom and close to her. She said, "I cannot believe that a hospital would let a near 94-year-old woman who has fever and congestion, she's susceptible to pneumonia, that they would let her go." And she was really frustrated with the hospital. So at some point in the conversation, I said, "Sandy, hey, hold on just a second. Let me remind you a couple things. Number one, hospitals are not prisons. And there's no warden that's going to keep you in the hospital. Our mother, let me say this better, your mother checked herself out of the hospital. And if you want to blame somebody and fuss about something, you shouldn't be fussing at the hospital. You should be talking to your mom." So after that conversation, we talked about how stubborn my mother is. I mean, she went home and she waited for the results, and her response is, "There are a lot of sick people in the hospital. I don't want to be there around all those sick people." And my mother, having 9 children, She's strong. She is stubborn. And I not only see it in her, I see it in my siblings. All my brothers and sisters. I see it in my kids. I see it mostly in the mirror. What do we do about that? 4 years ago, I saw the same strong mom weeping at my brother's funeral. In her grief, she said, parents should not outlive their children. Grief, heartache, depression, anxiety, pain, darkness. Life was not the way it was supposed to be. See, the disciples of Jesus and the other close followers were shattered, bereaved. This is not what they'd hoped. But early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary heads to the tomb. She's probably up early because she wasn't sleeping well. She's probably thinking about all the events of her life. That's what I do when I can't sleep. We think that Mary was the one who was caught in adultery, about to be stoned, but it was Jesus who saved her and said, hey, you guys are holding stones. If you're without sin, cast the first stone. Many remembered how Lazarus was raised from the dead, and we think Mary was probably there during that. Mary remembers the thousands fed from 5 loaves and 2 fish. She probably remembers even the teachings from the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. A week before, she saw how Jesus entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. He was the prophet, the Messiah, the one who created hope, and everyone's cheering. Then all of a sudden, she saw him arrested, beaten, nailed to a cross, suffering, still offering forgiveness to the guys on the right and left. By Jewish law, she had to wait until the Sabbath was over. She probably couldn't sleep because she felt an obligation. For all that he'd done for her, the least she could do is go and perform ritual burial rites for him. And as she went to the tomb, she expected him to be in the tomb. I think she expected a dead body, a cold body, a body that was alone. As she was there, she was so determined to find him, she discovered he wasn't there. I mean, it's not what she expected. This Easter, she was surprised. Her expectations were off kilter. It's not what she thought should be. You know, this Easter for us, I'm sure there are many of us, this is not what we thought Easter would be. It's not what I thought it would be 2 months ago. For 22 years, I've had the privilege of having an Easter sunrise service and Easter services at Suncoast. And even for longer than that, my entire ministry since 1982, I've had Easter Sunday. This is a little bit different. We're still having it, but the crowd is a little different. And I'm glad we have this potential through the internet, through online, to be able to communicate with one another. But through COVID-19, isolation, social distancing, self-quarantine, who would have thought that'd be Easter weekend? I'll tell you what is the same. Just like Mary, I want to find him. Don't you? This Easter, join me on a journey to the heart of God. Join me as we overcome our social distancing and discover an intimacy with the resurrected Christ. Join me as we put our assumptions, our expectations behind us, and we take this journey to the empty tomb. This Easter, I want to discover life instead of death. I want to discover once again the resurrected Christ. But it may have its challenges. Look at Mary's potential challenges. What were they? She had, first of all, she had to overcome her narrow expectations. She assumed that Jesus would be in the tomb. Now her mind was racing. Someone had taken Jesus' body. She made some assumptions that were about to be changed. But when she got there, she was devastated. Someone had stolen Jesus' body. That's what she thought. She ran for help. The whole time she ran for help, I can only imagine her thinking, where did they take him? Why did they do this? Why don't they just leave us alone and leave him alone? I have to tell the leaders, I have to tell Peter and John that Jesus' body is stolen, it's gone. She could not find Jesus, so she anticipated more heartache. She couldn't find him because he was not where she expected him to be. So what are your expectations today? How do we find the resurrected Christ today. Where do we expect to find him? For some people, we expect to find him in the light, which reminds me of an old story. A policeman sees a drunk man searching for something under a streetlight. He asks the drunk what he's lost, and the drunk says, "I've lost my keys." And they both look under the streetlight for a while. After a few minutes, the police officer, he says, "Are you sure you lost your keys here?" And the drunk replies, "No, I didn't lose them here. I lost them in the park." "So why are we searching here?" And the drunk replies, "Well, this is where the light is." See, we look where the light is. Joseph Campbell says, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." The darkness that you're afraid to go into often is the prelude to the dawn. The resurrection is the light that emerges from the cave of darkness. And we embrace the darkness within. We discover the light of Christ. Out of the darkness, a transformation occurs. Mary saw the signs of Jesus being gone. She assumed the worst. She's so caught up in her loss and darkness, she didn't see the reality that Jesus was standing right beside her. She thought he was the gardener. She had a tough time noticing him until he spoke her name. Today, would you join me as we follow our hearts to find Jesus? Which leads me to the second thought of the day. It's this. When you and I run toward God, our understanding of life and death changes. I love this passage in verse 3. So Peter and the other disciple, they race for the tomb. Both are running, but John outruns Peter, reaches the tomb first. He leans over, looks at the strips of linen, but does not go in. Simon Peter slowly gets there because he's a little bit older and a little bit slower. But he gets in and immediately goes into the tomb. It seems there's always someone sprinting, youth and speed. But we have different gifts. Sometimes a little more contemplation changes who we are. Peter may have jogged, but he was not afraid. See, I think there are sprinters and there are plotters. There's those who run fast and are timid, and there's those who run slower but are more decisive in what to do next. Mary's expectation, though, was that someone had taken Jesus' body. These guys finally got there, and they confirmed Jesus was gone. Simon Peter looked, and it didn't seem to register. The young John, he looked in, and he began to hope. But today, as we approach the tomb, whether it's a crawl or a walk or a jog or a sprint, let's look into the tomb and see what the early disciples saw. What did they find? Nothing. They were scratching their heads trying to figure it out. He is gone. He's not here. Where is he? Folks, throughout history, the church has taught the empty tomb is when nothing means everything. There have been times in my life when I was distracted or I was focused elsewhere and I did not see him. I've been to Israel many times with many of you, and in the Holy Land at the Garden Tomb, you go inside the place where they think Jesus could have been buried, and as you go there, there's a sign on the door on the way out that says, "He is not here, he is risen." But I would never have seen the sign if I hadn't been to the tomb. I would have never seen the sign if I had not gone in the tomb. I'd never seen the sign if I had not had my eyes open. But I was there, and I went in, and my eyes were open, and he is not there. But listen carefully. My hope is not in a place of death. My hope is not really in the darkness. My hope is not in the cross of Jesus Christ. My hope is not in the empty tomb. My hope is the one who dwells in the darkness. My hope is in Christ, the love, the truth, which can never be destroyed, and it still lives even today. Christ is risen. It's not just he has risen, but he is risen. It's something contemporary, something that's present. His spirit is alive today as it was 2,000 years ago. And my life is being transformed by that spirit as it lives within me, which leads me to the last thought of the day, and it's this. When Jesus whispers my name, life becomes more. In verse 10 of this passage, the disciples go back to their homes, but Mary stands outside the tomb crying. And in verse 15, this gardener / Jesus says, "Woman, Why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for? Even when he's talking to her, she does not recognize him. She thinks he's the gardener. She says, sir, if you've taken him somewhere, you tell me, and I'm going to go get him. Amazing. I'm sure not a big person, a small person hoping to go do that by herself, but that was her heart's cry. Today, my cry is for many groups who've lost sight of the authentic Jesus. And what I really want to ask them is, where have you put him? Mary was not ready to give up the search. She wanted to find Jesus and bring him back to the tomb. Too many people want Jesus in the tomb. Too many people have left him on the cross. Too many people want him to be predictable, crucified, dead, and buried. Yeah, I read something most recently that fits this circumstance. See, we feel most comfortable when things are certain, but we feel most alive when they're not. Mary felt probably more comfort if she'd gotten there and Jesus had been in the grave. Grieving, she was certain he was there. Instead, the gardener speaks her name, and the alive Christ brings her back to life. And she feels most alive when she's out of her comfort zone. From darkness, grief, and despair to the most alive feeling, exhilaration and joy. I wonder how many times I'm looking for Jesus. And I think I'm about to find him when I realize he's been looking for me all along. This I truly believe. When we search for him, the Spirit of Christ, he finds us. Reminds me of the story of Luke 15. The lost son takes his inheritance from his father. He leaves home. He spends the entire lot, and finally he's in darkness, eating with pigs, and he comes to his senses. The light comes on in the darkness. He says, my father's servants eat better than I do. I'm going to go home. I'm going to tell my dad I'm sorry, and I'm going to say I just want to be a servant. And when he's a long way off, his father sees him. And before he can ever get home, his father runs to him, embraces him, and welcomes him home. See, that's the truth. When we seek him, he finds us. In our times of desperation, I want to remind you, no matter how alone you are, no matter how self-quarantined you are, no matter how much you've distanced yourself from others, the Spirit of Christ is near. And as soon as our hearts realize that, he reaches out to us. That's the meaning of Easter. See, I want my heart to be open, so I discovered Jesus in the dark times. And when you and I run toward God, our understanding of life and death changes. But when Jesus whispers my name, life becomes more. Let me pray for you. Father, thanks for this Easter weekend. We celebrate the truths of Christ, the fact that that Spirit could not be killed or buried. It always comes back, and it's alive today. The very wholesome image of Christ is ours. Forgive us for the times that we miss it. Today our eyes are open, our hearts are warmed. Christ is here. We celebrate life in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you so much for watching today. I want to close this with a story. Story I found recently from a guy by the name of Eugene Kelly in the book Chasing Daylight. Eugene O'Kelly was a CEO of a $4 billion company, 20,000 employees. It was the last week of May 2005. He was 53 years old when he was told by his doctor that he had 3 golf ball-sized tumors in his brain. He was inoperable, and they said, Gene, you only have 3 months to live. And there's a statement in this book that says, when he heard that, he said, I was blessed. I was told I had 3 months to live. He resigned his job, and he created a plan. It was an accounting firm, and accountants had plans. And this is what he did. He drew 5 circles, the bigger circle with 4 circles inside. Circle 5, this broad circle, was the most important people that are around him that were acquaintances and friends. He wanted to just contact them briefly, so he either emailed them or made a phone call and expressed his appreciation for these people. And as he entered circle number 3 and 4, close friends and colleagues, he had meaningful meals with them and planned events with them. Circle 2 was family gatherings. His mom, his brother, his sisters. They came to visit for a few days. Circle 1, his children. His youngest was only 14. When they found out in May that he was going to pass away. He realized that when she started school in the fall. No dad. He spent the last of his life with his wife and his daughters, and he wrote this: I was blessed. I was told I had 3 months to live. He said, I experienced more perfect moments in 2 weeks than I had in 5 years. I was glad I had the opportunity to know that I was going to pass away, not that it would happen instantly. He said, facing death creates the possibility of life. This Easter, can I remind you, no matter how isolated you are, don't forget to live. The author of life, the one who lives in the darkness, his spirit is alive. He lives in us. He just wanted me to remind you to turn the light on. You're not alone. He loves you today, and so do I. God bless. Thanks for watching.